Morning. So welcome to the last meeting of the year. Great job. So what I'll do is I'm going to offer 3 different ideas to think about going into summer because you were almost there. I don't think you need a lot of advice on exams. My only general comment would be there's a lot of research out there that shows that the amount of sleep you have and the kind of diet you have at times of stress matters a lot. So be really good about getting sleep and eating well. It will, in fact, make a difference, and that the science on that is absolutely clear. I wanted to talk briefly about reading. In the summer reading, I was looking at memoirs of Horace Taft, and I found something he wrote in his memoirs from 1922. I thought this was interesting. Again, remember, this is a very different world that Taft lived in than my world or your world. There was obviously no internet, no computers, and so people read a lot. And he wrote this. He wrote to his great friend, a man named Sherman Thatcher, who started the Thatcher School in California. He wrote, "Dear Sherman, books are certainly a great blessing, are they not? I read every night after I go to bed, and I generally wake up between 4 and 6 and read some more." It's extraordinary. I don't think any of us do that anymore. But for him, it was real. That is, when he says they're a great blessing, remember, this is a man who had lost his wife to cancer about a decade before that, and they were a great blessing. So one of the things I'd say, I hope you do, is, in fact, think about what you're going to read. Obviously, the book that you know about, The Other Wes Moore, it's Tommy talked about it. It's a great book. It's a short read, and it's a really fascinating one, because it doesn't lead to easy conclusions on why he, Wes Moore, becomes a scholar and does extraordinarily well, and now you see on the news all the time, and why this other Wes Moore ends up in jail. He doesn't give any easy solutions, but it's a fascinating account. I think you can enjoy it. If I had one author I would recommend, if you pick up other books, and I know there's some great ones out there, and you may have begun thinking, I really am partial to Malcolm Gladwell's work, and if you know him, he has written a number of bestsellers, and I would recommend in order Outliers. Anyone, raise your hand if you've ever read Outliers and know of it. I'm just curious. Okay, so a few of you know about it. Outliers is a book which tries to answer, why do some people become extraordinarily successful? How do they become the outliers? And it's a really interesting book. He's written another book called Tipping Point, in which he explores why ideas take root and become major social phenomenon. And then the last one he's written that I think is interesting is called Blink. And Blink is a book that sort of explores why is it that sometimes the things we think in the blink of an eye, the things that don't require a lot of thought, actually can be our best thinking. So I would highly recommend any of his works. Now, to the group in front of me, Rising Seniors, it's an amazing thing to think about. Yeah, it's amazing. So it's remarkable. It is remarkable to think about. And I do want to remind you, you guys come back with a draft of your college essay, okay? I know. Well, that's not nice. That's not nice. You guys are going to have it as well one day. The college essay, the college office has talked to you about it. And actually, this is advice for everybody because you're going to face it. Don't think about it in the beginning of the summer. Forget it. You're going to be working hard for the next week or so. Start your vacation. But I think you should begin thinking about writing a draft of that essay with the goal that when you come back, it's done. And here are the 2 reasons it's really hard to do. It's really hard to write the college essay, primarily because this is a school filled with really talented people who don't like to brag about themselves, right? People don't like to say, I'm amazing. And you don't want to write a college essay which does that. And the second thing is this. I often talk to seniors who say, Mr. Mack, nothing amazing happened in my life. I wasn't raised by wolves. You know, what am I going to write about? And I can't tell you how many times seniors have said to me, you know, I had a really happy upbringing. You know, my parents have been great. I've been lucky. I've gone to this good school. And my advice would be this phrase. Try to locate the extraordinary in the ordinary, right? Try to look for the extraordinary in ordinary moments. And I'll give you a quick story to tell you what I mean by this. A few years ago, I had a senior girl come to me and say, could I read her college essay? And I read a lot of them, and I said, sure, I'd be happy to help you. This is a girl who had traveled a lot. She loved travel, and she had been given a pool grant. And the summer before, she had actually gone to Samoa to do some community service work. And I said, I'd be happy to read it. So she gave me her essay. We sat in my office, and the essay began like this. This summer, I was fortunate enough to receive a grant to go do community service work in Samoa, and it really changed my life. And I was like, you got to be kidding. Who's your audience? And she said, I don't know, the college admissions. I said, well, your audience is this exhausted, stressed out reader who probably has to read 130 of these tonight and only has 10 minutes for each of these applications, and therefore only has 2 or 3 minutes, and you're going to begin like that? And she said, yeah, but it was really important to me, and it was a great experience. I said, what was so great about it? She said, well, I had to do this long travel day, and I went away, and it was hard, and it was really challenging, and I was sick when I got there. And I said, geez, that must have been tough. What was wrong? She said, well, I got this eye infection, and when I arrived, my eyes were beginning to crust over. It was really painful, and I couldn't see very well. I said, geez, that must have been terrible. And so when you got to the village and your host family, did they take you to the doctors or the hospital? And she said, no, Miss Mac, it's not like there was a hospital anywhere nearby. I couldn't do anything. And I was in a lot of pain. And I said, well, what happened? She said, well, I was exhausted from traveling, and my host mother, who's like a grandmother at its age, she laid me down on this bed, so it's my first night there, and she began to bathe my forehead with a cool washcloth. And she said, I felt really good. And I fell asleep in this strange town with this strange woman. And she said, when I woke up, I'll never forget the moment she told me. She said, I woke up, I could feel something cool, some liquid being dripped in my eye. And she was just rubbing my forehead, and she was just dropping drops in my eye and rubbing my eyes. And I could feel the relief, and my eyes began to open. I said, well, what was she putting in? Was it water? She said, no, it was mother's milk. And I said, it was what? Right? And she said, well, my host mother went into the village and found a woman who was breastfeeding her baby and came back with a bowl of milk and bathed my eye in milk. And I said, and you don't think you have an essay there? I mean, you could do a million things with that. It's an extraordinary story in a very ordinary moment. A woman who she's never met before goes to another woman who's a perfect stranger, who out of some deep place of goodness in her heart shares her child's milk with a perfectly strange girl, because there must be a tradition that this is medicinal. And in fact, she did begin to feel better, and she ended up having a great experience. So now you could say, well, wait a minute, Ms. Mack, that's like a crazy story. I don't have anything like that. It's actually not, in the sense that it began with something ordinary. It began with a trip. And it began with a really boring start to an essay. And she rewrote it, and you can imagine how she rewrote it. And it was a beautiful essay, and it was an essay which probed for her the ways in which she came to understand the ways in which people with radically different perspectives can come together, and that maybe there's a possibility that kindness can bridge distance and so on. So to you, I'd say, as you're thinking about it, think about the ordinary, and then say, is it possible there's something extraordinary in it? Is there a person in your life who maybe actually has had an extraordinary effect on you? Maybe in the family, maybe a relative, maybe an employer, maybe a neighbor. Think in that way. Has there ever been a moment which, when you look at it, actually seems fairly ordinary, but when you probe it, when you explore it deeply, it actually ends up something extraordinary came out of it? I would suggest that you probably can find those. So my advice to you would be, don't begin thinking, I have to tell a story about starting a business, writing my first novel. I know you hear stories about those. Those are very rare in the college application world. What the college people want to do is they want to get to know you. So my advice would be, look for something ordinary and then keep probing it, if you would, and find something extraordinary. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is something for all of you. And it's an idea I've been thinking about primarily because of a book I read last summer, and I've been continuing to look at. It's an idea called media fasting, which is probably self-explanatory, but it's an interesting idea, and I actually talked to someone today about it. Here's what I'd like you to think about possibly doing, and if you do, I'd love to hear back about it. There's a trend in our country increasingly, in particular among college students, but not only, to do what's called a media fast, where you, for a time being, you take yourself offline. And there are people who do this and they say, I wanted to feel what it was like, you know. Or they said, my life revolves around Facebook so exclusively, or I text so much. I wanted to feel like what it would be like not to do that. There's no value attached to it. There's no one saying this is good or bad either way, but there's a kind of existential experience that they want to discover. What does it feel like if I stop doing this? And the woman that I've been reading a lot from, as I say, is this woman named Sherry Turkle. She's a professor at MIT, and she wrote a book called, fascinating title, and you can see what she's probing. It's called Alone Together. Alone Together, and the subtitle is Why We Expect More of Technology and Less from Each Other. And what she does is she reminds us of the great gains of being connected. And my guess is all of you are going to stay connected this summer. And there are enormous gains from being connected. I don't have a Facebook page, but I text a lot, in particular in the summers when I'm out of the office, and I have a few people that I stay in touch with regularly, including family members. And I belong to a kind of members-only blog. Some of you know it's a fishing blog. Okay, I'll confess, I like to fish. It's not very serious, but it's a blog of men and women who fish. It's got the terrible catchy phrase, it's called the Bite Club. Really clever. It's worse than that, it's offered through this fishing store that I'm embarrassed to say is called the Hookup. So, yeah, that's right. Yeah. So your headmaster logs on to something called the Hookup. But what's interesting is I was one of those people, I'm a different generation than you, so I was one of those people who said, I'm never going to be one of those losers who has a life online. And in fact, for me, I have a really big life online, in particular in the summer. And I find through there all the things you guys find. I have an identity, right? I have an identity that I form out there, and it is people putting posts and their threads of conversations about fishing, and I shape myself just the way you do. I become an information sharer because I've been out there a long time, and people post a question and maybe I write an answer. I become a host. Someone may say, I've never fished this area, can anyone tell me something? And I may write back, sure, and I'll be out in my boat and here's the name of it and be happy to look for you. I become a friend. And we all do that. People post things that aren't just about fishing. In fact, some of them are deeply personal. People who write a post that they've gone out fishing with their terminally ill father, or just wanted to let everybody know I'll be out there on Sunday. My son has leukemia, but his treatment's going well, and I'll be out there if anyone wants to tell me where the fish are. And so like everybody, I form an identity through that group. And it's important to me. And even as I say this and the idea of a fast, I don't know if I could do without that community. Sherry Turkle writes this: connectivity offers new possibilities for experimenting with identity for all, and particularly in adolescence, because it gives a sense of free space. That is, all of you can experiment with identity just as surely as I do with my little silly fishing club. She writes, it feels really good to connect. I mean, isn't that why you do that? Here's an MIT professor who writes, I like to look at my list of favorites on my iPhone contact list and I see everyone that I cherish. Each is just a tap away. If someone doesn't have time to talk to me, I can text a greeting and they will know that I am thinking of them. Looking over recent text exchanges with friends and family reliably puts me in a good mood. She goes on to say that she kept the entire log of text messages with her daughter during her daughter's senior year. So this kind of connection was powerful for her. She writes as well, she says, another quote, she says, this is the norm for all of us, and we didn't know it was going to become the norm. For you, you grew into it, and it is the norm, and it's all you've ever known. But she writes this: we began a decade or so ago by thinking that emails and texts and Facebook messaging are thin gruel. Gruel, she means soup, like not really particularly nutritious. That these were thin gruel, but useful if the alternative was sparse communication with people we care about. But then we became accustomed to the special pleasures, that we can have connection when and where we want or need it. We can easily make it go away. In only a few steps, you have people describing their life on Facebook as better than anything they know in the real world. So there are huge gains and wonderful things that come out of it. And you all are testimony to it. And I have many friends who, in my age, who say the same thing. And by the way, do you know what the fastest growing demographic in Facebook is? It's grandparents. It's grandparents. It's what they call the silver surfers. Grandparents want to follow what their grandchildren are doing, and that's the number that's increasing more rapidly than any other demographic in Facebook. Now, Turkle says something else, though, and this is important, and this is why I get to the idea of possibly taking a media break. There are costs. There are clearly benefits that we can talk about, but there are clearly costs. And two of the costs she talks about are the sense of effort and pressure to keep up to date, to continue to feed Facebook. Many say Facebook is an animal. You have to continually feeding it. And there's also the sense of pressure. What am I going to post? Who am I when I post? Is that the good picture? I look too frumpy if I put that one. No. What favorite songs am I going to put up there? My identity is now out there for everybody to see. That's a lot of pressure. There's another theme that's emerging with it, and that is both parents and their children feeling trapped. Both parents and children are beginning to say, there are times I feel trapped. How many of you have felt trapped because your parents are texting you and expecting an immediate reply, right? And if you don't, what do? They get at it. Parents in turn say they feel trapped. Sherry Turkle quotes a mother who says, you know what I envy? I envy my mother. We used to go off to school, she went off to work, and we didn't hear from each other until 6 at night. So parents say, when I text my son or daughter and I don't hear back right away, because I've built up this expectation of immediate response, they say they experience a deep level of distress. Many parents say, something must be wrong. So I'm trapped in a world where I feel I need to text rapidly. I expect a rapid reply. If I don't get it back, something must be wrong. So that's one of the feelings that's being reported. And then there's another one, and that is the potential loss of personal contact. We are beginning to hear increasingly the ways in which parents and their kids sometimes feel the loss of personal contact. Increasingly, children are reporting, it's really frustrating trying to get my dad's attention. I can't get my mom to pay attention because she's busy texting, or she's on her own page. I was trying to talk to him on the ski lift, but he was texting. And parents are saying the same thing sometimes. I just wanted to sit in a room together and be able to have a conversation. So those are the kind of costs that Sherry Turkle probes. And she's not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. She clearly says in her book, there's amazing things that have come with this connectivity. But you might want to try this idea. What would it be like? I don't know if have you actually ever thought about this seriously? What would it be like to be unnetworked for a time period? I don't know. Is there anyone in here who said, I am going to take myself off of Facebook for an entire week? I'm just curious. Has anyone done that? Yeah, interesting. Yeah, interesting. This trend is getting more and more common, and two things are reported by people who do it. I don't know if this is true for those of you who raise your hands. The first thing is many report that a sense of emancipation. God, it's really cool. I didn't have to check every day. I front-loaded it by posting that I was going to take myself off, so there was no expectation, there was no concerns about why I was not updating. So there's a sense of, wow, that felt a kind of freedom. But the other thing is this. Many also said, you know what? It was nerve-wracking. I missed it. It was hard to do that. I'd never experienced that feeling. So here's a question I might have for you, and that is, maybe think about what it would be like. What would it be like to take yourself off? I'm going to try it, and if anybody tries it, I would really welcome hearing back from you. Maybe you give a talk about it. Sherry Turkle says, our need to be in touch might have once in a different generation been described as odd behavior. She actually says, I wonder if we might have even described it as pathological. That's sort of strong language. She says, over time, a new style of being with each other becomes socially sanctioned. So the history of our species, how we are together gains particular sanctions. In every era, certain ways of relating comes to feel natural. In our time, if we can be continually in touch, Needing to be continually touched does not seem a problem or a pathology, but an accommodation to what technology affords. It becomes the norm. So it's so easy to do that. So a question I leave you with for the summer is when you head off. Perhaps explore that idea. If we grant that our identities are really wrapped up in our online identities, and it is for me in a small but important way, and for you in even more important ways, you might explore this summer, maybe try an experiment. And it's an experiment that's happening all over the country by different people and of all age groups, but as I say, particularly college students. Maybe try media fast. See what that would feel like. And chronicle that to yourself. What did it feel like? Really tap the experience emotionally, psychically, psychologically. What did it feel like to pull myself back from that world for a time being, to separate myself from the creation of that electronic identity? And if you do, I would love to hear about it when you come back. Maybe a number of you do, and we say, let's have a school meeting in which you talk about what that experience was like. I have no preconceptions on where it would lead you. I am not saying it's a simple good thing or a bad thing, but I think it would be an experiment worth trying. So to you, I'd say, get a draft, you all in the front, draft an essay. Get a start on that at some point this summer so you come back and get it done. Don't rub it in, you younger ones. Do some reading. Obviously, enjoy Wes Moore and any other reading you do from the selection list, and maybe explore that question of who you are through the internet. Until then, you've got a few days of hard work. I wish you the very best luck on your exams. Okay?